The road was eerily quiet as Ryan drove toward the edge of Pine Hollow. He'd heard the stories everyone in the area had. They whispered about the abandoned village that no one dared to enter. Some said it was cursed. Others believed it was simply a ghost story. But Ryan, a journalist known for chasing strange and mysterious tales, saw it as an opportunity. He adjusted his camera on the passenger seat and glanced at the GPS. The route seemed straightforward, yet the closer he got, the weaker the signal became. Finally, the GPS gave up entirely, leaving him to rely on an old paper map he'd borrowed from the local library. The village didn't even have a name anymore. It was marked on the map with a faint outline and the words, "Site of Pine Hollow Village, abandoned," scribbled across it. That was the extent of its recognition, a forgotten dot on the map, shrouded in mystery. As Ryan's car rounded a bend, the forest opened up, revealing a sight that sent a shiver down his spine. There it was, the village. Small houses lined the main street, their wooden frames weathered and leaning as though they were bowing under the weight of time. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence so profound that Ryan could hear his own breathing echo back at him. He parked the car at the entrance and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. A sudden chill swept through the air, making him pull his jacket tighter. The village looked like it had been frozen in time. Laundry hung on lines between houses, dishes sat on outdoor tables, and bicycles rested against fences, as if waiting for children who would never return. "Hello," Ryan called out, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. No answer. He took out his camera and began recording. "This is Ryan Carter, investigative journalist, standing at the entrance of what locals call the Silent Village. This place has been abandoned for decades, and no one knows why. Today, I'll explore and try to uncover the truth." As he walked down the main street, Ryan noticed something strange. The houses weren't decayed the way he expected. There was dust, yes, but the structures seemed oddly well preserved. It was as if the village had been left only yesterday. He reached the town square where a fountain stood at the center. Its water was stagnant and covered with a thin layer of moss. But what caught Ryan's attention wasn't the fountain. It was the people. Dozens of them standing still. Ryan froze. His breath caught in his throat as he realized they weren't statues. They were people, men, women, and children, standing in various poses, their eyes wide open but unseeing. Some held baskets of fruit, others had tools in their hands, and a few were mid-step as if frozen in motion. "What the hell?" he whispered, raising his camera to capture the scene. The lens focused on a woman standing by a cart of vegetables. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy, and her lips slightly parted as if she had been about to speak. Ryan stepped closer, his heart pounding. He reached out hesitantly and touched her arm. Cold, like marble. He stumbled back, nearly dropping his camera. His mind raced. Were they dead? Was this some elaborate hoax? But as he looked around, he noticed something even more unnerving. There was no sign of decay. The people looked as though they'd been frozen just moments ago. "Impossible," he muttered. A faint sound broke the silence. A low, almost imperceptible hum. It seemed to emanate from the ground beneath his feet. Ryan turned in circles, trying to locate the source, but it was everywhere and nowhere all at once. He decided to explore further. His curiosity, though tinged with fear, pushed him forward. He entered the nearest house, the door creaking as it swung open. Inside, the scene was just as bizarre. Plates of half-eaten food sat on the dining table. A chair was tipped over, and a book lay open on the floor. It was as though the occupants had simply vanished, or been interrupted mid-action. Ryan picked up the book. The pages were yellowed, and the text was in a language he didn't recognize. symbols and shapes that seemed to shift as he stared at them. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him, and he dropped the book, stumbling back against the wall. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "What is this place?" he said aloud, his voice trembling. As he stepped outside again, the hum grew louder. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a feeling, a vibration that seemed to pulse through the very air around him. He walked toward the edge of the village, where a dense forest loomed, its trees unnaturally tall and dark. At the edge of the forest, he noticed something etched into the ground, a large circular symbol, similar to the ones in the book. It glowed faintly, the same eerie light he had seen in the villagers' eyes. Ryan crouched down to inspect it. As he did, the hum grew deafening, and a sudden gust of wind knocked him off balance. He looked up, and his blood ran cold. A figure stood at the edge of the forest. It was tall, impossibly tall, its shape shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed with the same unnatural light as the symbol, and though it didn't move, Ryan felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the figure were watching him, studying him. He scrambled back, his heart pounding. The figure didn't follow, but its presence lingered, pressing down on him like a weight. Ryan turned and ran back toward the center of the village, his mind racing. Whatever this place was, it wasn't abandoned. It was alive in a way he couldn't comprehend, and it was watching him. Ryan's footsteps echoed as he sprinted through the silent streets of the village. His breaths came in short, sharp bursts, each one mingling with the deafening hum that seemed to follow him everywhere. He dared not look back, afraid that the shadowy figure at the forest's edge might have moved, might be following. When he reached the fountain in the center of the village, he stopped and crouched, gasping for air. His camera hung loosely around his neck, swinging with every shaky breath. The people, those frozen, lifeless figures, still stood in their haunting silence, watching yet unseeing. Ryan wiped the sweat from his forehead and tried to calm his racing mind. This isn't real, he told himself. Can't be real. But it was. Every detail, every sound, every sensation told him that he was in the middle of something far beyond his understanding. He glanced at the nearest figure, a young boy holding a toy airplane. The boy's face was serene, as though frozen in a moment of simple joy. Ryan whispered, "What happened to you?" The boy, of course, didn't answer, but the humming grew louder. Ryan stood, his legs trembling, and turned in a slow circle. The hum wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, a pressure that wrapped around him, making it hard to breathe. He tried to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere. The air, the ground, the frozen villagers themselves. He needed answers. His journalist instincts kicked in, pushing past the fear. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to understand this place, he had to keep moving. He had to keep looking. Ryan decided to head to the largest building in the village, a church that loomed at the far end of the street. Its spire rose high above the rooftops, cutting through the gray sky like a jagged scar. If there were any clues about what had happened here, he figured they'd be in there. The walk to the church felt like an eternity. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every window seemed to hide unseen eyes. The villagers stood on either side of the street, their eerie stillness making Ryan's skin crawl. He avoided looking directly at them, but their presence was impossible to ignore. When he reached the church, the heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar. Ryan hesitated. Something about the darkness inside felt alive, as though the building itself were breathing. He swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The air inside was thick and cold, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and something metallic, like blood. Ryan's footsteps echoed on the stone floor as he stepped inside, his camera's light barely piercing the darkness. The church was empty, save for rows of wooden pews and a massive stained glass window at the far end. The window depicted an angel holding a sword, its face twisted in an expression that was more rage than peace. The colors of the glass shimmered faintly, casting strange patterns on the floor. Ryan's gaze was drawn to the altar. Something was there. A book, large and bound in cracked leather. It seemed out of place, untouched by time like the rest of the village. He approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he couldn't. He needed to know. The book was covered in the same strange symbols he'd seen in the house earlier. His fingers trembled as he opened it, the brittle pages crackling in the silence. The text inside was written in the same shifting script, but as Ryan stared at it, the symbols began to change. They twisted and morphed, forming words in a language he could read. The Mark of the Watchers, the title read. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the cryptic text. The book spoke of a curse placed upon the village, a punishment for a sin long forgotten. The Watchers, it said, were beings from beyond, sent to observe and enforce the curse. The villagers had tried to fight it, to escape, but none had succeeded. The final page was blank, save for a single sentence. Those who enter will not leave. Ryan slammed the book shut, his breathing ragged. His mind raced. Was this some elaborate story, written to scare off trespassers? Or was it real? The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the church. Ryan turned toward the door, his every nerve on edge. And then he saw them, the figures, the frozen villagers. They were moving, slowly, stiffly. They turned their heads toward him, their glassy eyes locking onto his. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as though controlled by invisible strings. Ryan stumbled back, nearly tripping over the altar. No, he whispered. This isn't happening. The villagers began to move toward the church, their steps slow but deliberate. Their expressions remained blank, but their eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie light as the symbols and the figure in the forest. Ryan's survival instincts kicked in. He bolted for the side door of the church, shoving it open and spilling out into the alley behind the building. He didn't stop to look back. He just ran, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his ears. The village seemed different now. The streets were darker, the air heavier. The houses loomed over him, their windows like empty eyes. And the hum. It was everywhere, pressing down on him, filling his mind with a growing sense of dread. Ryan ducked into another house, slamming the door behind him. He crouched in the shadows, his chest heaving. The sound of footsteps echoed outside, slow and rhythmic. He peeked through a crack in the wall. The villagers were searching for him. Their movements were strange, almost mechanical. They moved as one, their heads turning in unison, their glowing eyes scanning the streets. Ryan held his breath, praying they wouldn't find him. And then he saw it again, the figure from the forest. It stood at the edge of the village, its towering form shrouded in darkness. But this time it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. They were coming for him. Ryan's mind raced. He had to get out of here. He had to find a way to escape. But as he looked around, he realized something terrifying. The village wasn't just cursed. It was alive, and it wasn't going to let him leave. Ryan crouched in the corner of the dimly lit house, his back pressed against the cold wall. The air around him felt suffocating, heavy with the presence of something unnatural. Outside, the rhythmic footsteps of the villagers echoed like a dreadful heartbeat, growing louder as they approached. He held his breath, trying to still the trembling in his body. The glow from their eyes seeped through the cracks of the wooden door. Ryan's mind raced. How had it come to this? Just a day ago, he was a curious journalist chasing a mysterious story. Now he was trapped in a nightmare. The footsteps stopped just outside the house. Ryan's pulse quickened. He could hear the creak of the porch as one of them stepped onto it. The door rattled, as if something or someone was testing it. Ryan's grip tightened on the camera around his neck. He knew it was useless as a weapon, but it was all he had. His eyes darted around the room, searching for another way out. There was a small window on the far side, but it was partially boarded up. It would take time to break through. Time he didn't have. The door creaked open. Ryan froze. One of the villagers stepped inside, its movements stiff and unnatural. Its glowing eyes scanned the room, the eerie light cutting through the darkness. Ryan shrank deeper into the shadows, willing himself to disappear. The figure stopped, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for something. The humming sound that filled the village grew louder, almost deafening. Ryan bit his lip to keep from crying out. And then, the figure turned and left, its glowing gaze sweeping past him without pause. The door clicked shut behind it. Ryan exhaled shakily, his body sagging against the wall. He couldn't stay here. Sooner or later, they would find him. He needed to move. Quietly, he crept to the window and began prying at the boards with his bare hands. The wood was old and splintered, but it held fast. Ryan cursed under his breath, his fingers bleeding from the effort. Finally, with a loud crack, one of the boards gave way. Ryan winced at the noise, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced back at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but the silence held. He squeezed through the small opening, landing in the overgrown grass outside. The cool night air hit his face, a brief reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere inside the house. Ryan crouched low, his eyes scanning the area. The villagers were still patrolling the streets, their glowing eyes sweeping back and forth like searchlights. He needed to find cover, someplace they wouldn't think to look. His gaze fell on the bell tower. It loomed over the village, its silhouette stark against the gray sky. If he could get up there, he might have a chance to see the entire layout of the village, and maybe even find a way out. Ryan moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows. Every step felt like an eternity, every sound magnified in the silence. He avoided the villagers, their glowing eyes a constant reminder of the danger. When he reached the base of the bell tower, he found the door ajar. The wood was splintered, as though someone or something had forced it open. Ryan hesitated. The thought of entering another dark, confined space filled him with dread. But he had no choice. Inside, the air was cold and damp. A narrow spiral staircase wound upward, its wooden steps creaking under his weight. Ryan climbed slowly, his hands gripping the railing for support. About halfway up, he stopped. Something was scrawled on the wall in the same shifting symbols he'd seen in the book. The symbols glowed faintly, their light pulsing like a heartbeat. Ryan reached out to touch them, but pulled back at the last second. Not a good idea, he thought. He continued upward, the hum growing louder with each step. When he finally reached the top, he was greeted by a breathtaking yet terrifying sight. The village stretched out below him, its dark streets crisscrossing like a spider's web. The frozen villagers were scattered throughout, their glowing eyes moving in eerie unison. But beyond the village, the forest loomed, its edges shrouded in a dense fog. Ryan scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of a way out. But no matter where he looked, the forest seemed endless, the fog impenetrable. It was as though the village was cut off from the rest of the world, trapped in its own pocket of reality. As he turned to climb back down, something caught his eye. A movement in the forest. The figure was there. It stood just beyond the village's edge, its towering form barely visible through the fog. But this time it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes identical to the villagers. They were coming. Ryan's stomach dropped. He had to warn someone, anyone. But there was no one to warn. He was alone. The humming grew louder, shaking the very walls of the bell tower. Ryan stumbled, gripping the railing to steady himself. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their light filling the small space. And then he heard it. A voice. It was faint, barely audible over the hum, but it was there. Ryan? He froze. The voice was familiar, but distorted, as though it were being spoken through a broken radio. Help us! Ryan's blood turned to ice. The voice was coming from the symbols. Who are you? He whispered, his voice trembling. The symbols pulsed, their glow intensifying. We are trapped. Ryan stepped back, his mind reeling. Was this some kind of trick? Or was someone, or something, trying to communicate with him? Before he could ask another question, the symbols flared brightly, blinding him. He threw up his hands to shield his eyes, but the light seared through his vision. When it finally faded, the tower was silent. The humming was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. But Ryan knew better. The quiet was more terrifying than the noise. He made his way down the staircase, his legs trembling. When he reached the ground floor, he hesitated at the door. The village was still out there, the glowing eyes of the villagers sweeping the streets. Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. The village wasn't just a trap. It was alive. And it wasn't done with him yet. Ryan stepped out of the bell tower, his nerves on edge. The night air was colder now, biting at his skin, and the village seemed even more lifeless than before. The hum was gone, replaced by an unsettling silence, the kind of silence that made you feel like you weren't alone. He crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, his eyes scanning the streets. The villagers were still moving, their glowing eyes casting faint beams of light as they walked. Their motions were mechanical, as if controlled by invisible strings. Ryan's heart raced as he remembered the figures in the forest. They were coming. Whatever they were, they had the same glowing eyes. The thought sent a chill down his spine. I need to get out of here, he thought. But how? The forest was shrouded in fog, and the village itself felt like a maze designed to trap him. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound, a whisper. Ryan? He whipped around, his breath catching in his throat. The voice was soft, almost pleading, and it came from somewhere nearby. Help us! Ryan's eyes darted around, but he saw no one. His pulse quickened. He wasn't imagining it. The voice was real, and it was calling his name. He crept through the shadows, following the sound. It led him to an old house on the edge of the village. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. The house seemed to sag under its own weight, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The voice came again, louder this time. Ryan? In here. Against his better judgment, Ryan stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under his weight, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. Dust hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. The voice was coming from upstairs. He hesitated at the base of the staircase. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run as far away as he could. But something compelled him to keep going. As he climbed the stairs, he noticed strange markings on the walls. They were similar to the symbols he had seen in the bell tower, glowing faintly in the dim light. The sight made his skin crawl. At the top of the stairs, a door stood ajar. The voice was coming from inside. Ryan pushed the door open slowly, his heart pounding. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the center. On the chair sat a small, cracked mirror. He approached cautiously, his reflection distorted in the broken glass. The voice whispered again, softer now. "Ryan, look." He hesitated, then reached out and touched the mirror. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the room changed. The air grew heavy, and the walls seemed to close in around him. The mirror glowed faintly, its surface rippling like water. And then he saw it. In the reflection, the room was full of people. Men, women, and children stood silently, their faces pale and lifeless. Their eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the villagers outside. Ryan stumbled back, his breath coming in short gasps. The figures didn't move, but their eyes followed him. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice shaking. The figures didn't respond, but the whispering started again, louder this time, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. "Help us. Trapped. The forest. The fog." Ryan clutched his head, trying to block out the noise. It was overwhelming, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The voices stopped. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, a single voice spoke, clear and calm. "You must leave before they come." Ryan's eyes widened. "Before who comes? What's happening here?" The mirror flickered, the reflection shifting. Ryan saw the forest, its trees dark and foreboding. The figures from before were there, their glowing eyes piercing through the fog. "They are the Watchers," the voice said. "They control the village. They feed on those who enter. If you stay, you will become one of us." Ryan's stomach churned. "How do I get out? The forest is endless. And the fog." "There is a way," the voice interrupted. "But it is dangerous. You must find the key." "What key?" Ryan demanded. The reflection flickered again, showing an old church in the center of the village. Its doors were chained shut, and strange symbols were etched into the wood. "The key is inside," the voice said. "But beware. The Watchers guard it." The mirror shattered, the pieces scattering across the floor. Ryan stumbled back, his heart racing. The voices were gone, but the sense of urgency remained. He didn't have much time. The Watchers were coming, and if he didn't find the key, he would be trapped in the village forever. Ryan ran down the stairs and out of the house, keeping to the shadows. The church loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette casting an ominous shadow over the village. As he made his way through the streets, he noticed something strange. The villagers had stopped moving. They stood frozen, their glowing eyes fixed on the church. Ryan's chest tightened. It was as if they knew where he was going. He quickened his pace, his footsteps silent on the cobblestone streets. The church grew closer, its massive doors towering over him. When he reached the entrance, he hesitated. The chains on the doors were thick and rusted, the symbols etched into the wood glowing faintly. Ryan reached out, his hand trembling. The moment he touched the chains, the air around him shifted. The hum returned, louder than ever, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. The villagers began to move again, their glowing eyes turning toward him. Ryan's heart raced as he pulled at the chains, his fingers slick with sweat. They wouldn't budge. Behind him, the villagers were closing in, their movements quick and jerky. Ryan panicked, his mind racing. And then he saw it, a small silver key hanging from one of the symbols. He grabbed it and jammed it into the lock. The chains fell away, and the doors creaked open. Ryan stepped inside, slamming the doors shut behind him. The hum stopped, and the silence returned. He turned to face the interior of the church, his breath catching in his throat. The walls were covered in the same glowing symbols, and at the center of the room stood an altar. On the altar lay a book, its cover black and ancient. Ryan approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The book pulsed with an eerie light, as if alive. He reached out to touch it, his fingers trembling. The moment he opened the book, the hum returned, louder than ever. The symbols on the walls began to glow, their light filling the room. And then he heard it, a low, guttural growl. Ryan turned slowly, his blood running cold. The Watchers had arrived. Ryan froze. The low growl reverberated through the church, sending chills up his spine. Slowly, he turned to face the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. The Watchers stood in the doorway, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness like lanterns. Their silhouettes were tall and twisted, almost human but not quite. They didn't walk like the villagers. No, their movements were fluid yet unnatural, as if gravity didn't affect them. Ryan instinctively stepped back, his hand gripping the edge of the altar. The book in front of him seemed to pulse, each beat matching the frantic rhythm of his heart. The Watchers didn't move closer. They stood there, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Felt like they were waiting for something. "What do you want from me?" Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. The growling stopped. The church grew silent, but the air around him felt heavier, almost suffocating. One of the Watchers stepped forward. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but Ryan could feel its gaze boring into him. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice low and guttural. Ryan's throat tightened. "I didn't have a choice. I just want to leave." The Watcher tilted its head, almost as if amused. "Leave? There is no leaving this place. Not for you. Not for anyone." Ryan clenched his fists, trying to suppress the rising panic. "That's not true. There's a way out. The voice in the mirror told me." The Watcher interrupted him with a sharp laugh, a sound that made Ryan's skin crawl. "The mirror? Lies and tricks. You think you can trust the whispers of the lost?" Ryan's mind raced. Was it lying? Or was the voice in the mirror the only chance he had? Another Watcher stepped forward, its movements eerily smooth. "The book," it said, pointing a long, bony finger at the altar. "It binds this place. It binds us all." Ryan looked down at the ancient book. Its cover was worn, the black leather cracked with age. Symbols he couldn't understand glowed faintly on its surface. "What is this?" he asked, his voice shaking. The first Watcher let out a low growl. "It is the beginning and the end. It holds the truth you seek, but the price of that truth is steep." Ryan swallowed hard. "What price?" The Watcher didn't answer. Instead, it stepped closer, the glow from its eyes illuminating its face. Ryan wished it hadn't. The creature's face was a twisted parody of humanity, its features stretched and warped as if molded by cruel hands. Its skin was pale and translucent, veins visible beneath the surface. "You must decide," the Watcher said, its voice softer now but no less menacing. "Open the book and you will see. But once you do, there is no turning back." Ryan's hands trembled as he stared at the book. It seemed to call to him, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. "What's in it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The truth," the Watcher replied. "But truth is a dangerous thing, Ryan. It will set you free, or it will destroy you." Ryan's mind raced. If the book held the answers he needed, he couldn't ignore it. But what if the Watchers were right? What if opening it would only make things worse? He glanced back at the door. The villagers were gathering outside, their glowing eyes staring through the windows. They didn't try to come in, but their presence was suffocating. "You don't have much time," the second Watcher said, its voice like a hiss. "They will come for you, and when they do, you will wish you had never set foot in this village." Ryan took a deep breath, his hands still shaking. Slowly, he reached out and touched the book. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the glow intensified, filling the room with a blinding light. The watchers hissed, stepping back into the shadows. "You've made your choice," one of them said, its voice barely audible over the hum that now filled the church. Ryan opened the book. The pages were blank at first, the glowing light fading as he flipped through them. But then, words began to appear, written in a language he didn't understand. The symbols glowed faintly, shifting and twisting as if alive. And then the whispers began. They started softly, barely more than a breeze. But they grew louder, filling his mind with voices that overlapped and tangled, each one speaking a different language. Ryan clutched his head, trying to block out the noise. But it was no use. The voices were inside him now, digging into his thoughts, his memories. He saw flashes of the village, its people, its history. He saw the moment it was cursed, the day the Watchers came. The villagers had called them for help, desperate to escape a plague that had swept through their homes. But the Watchers weren't saviors. They were something far worse. Ryan saw the villagers frozen in time, their lives stolen and their souls bound to the land. He saw the fog spreading, trapping anyone who dared to enter. And then he saw himself. The whispers grew louder, the images sharper. He saw his own face, his own body standing among the villagers. His eyes glowed just like theirs. "No," he shouted, slamming the book shut. The light vanished, leaving the church in darkness. The Watchers stepped forward, their glowing eyes the only source of illumination. "You see now," one of them said. "This is your fate. There is no escape." Ryan shook his head, backing away. "No, I won't let this happen. There has to be another way." The Watchers laughed, the sound echoing through the church. "There is no other way. The book has shown you the truth. You belong to the village now." Ryan's heart pounded. He couldn't let this be the end. There had to be something he could do, some way to break the curse. And then he remembered the key. His hand went to his pocket, and he felt the cold metal against his fingers. The voice in the mirror had told him to find it. Could it still help him? Ryan held up the key, its surface glinting in the faint light. The Watchers hissed, recoiling as if burned. "The key," one of them growled. "It should not exist. How did you?" Ryan didn't wait to hear the rest. He ran toward the altar, the key clutched tightly in his hand. The Watchers lunged, their movements swift and unnatural. But the key seemed to repel them, creating a barrier of light that kept them at bay. Ryan reached the altar and held the key above the book. The whispers returned, louder this time, almost deafening. "Free us," a voice pleaded. Ryan hesitated, his hand trembling. Was this the right thing to do? Before he could decide, the Watchers let out a deafening roar. The church shook, the walls cracking as the symbols on them began to glow brighter. Ryan took a deep breath, then plunged the key into the book. The moment it made contact, a blinding light filled the room. The Watchers screamed, their forms disintegrating into shadows. The light spread, consuming the church and spilling out into the village. Ryan felt himself being lifted, his body weightless as the world around him dissolved into white. And then, everything went silent. Ryan woke to the sound of absolute silence. No whispers, no growls, no humming energy. Just an eerie, weightless calm. He was lying on cold, damp ground, the scent of earth and mildew heavy in the air. For a moment, he kept his eyes shut, unsure if he had truly escaped or if he was trapped in another twisted nightmare. When he finally opened them, the world around him was unrecognizable. The church was gone. The towering spire, the glowing symbols, the Watchers, it had all vanished. Instead, Ryan found himself in a vast, open field bathed in soft, golden light. The air shimmered faintly, as though it wasn't entirely real. In the distance, he saw the village, its silent streets stretching out like a painting frozen in time. Ryan pushed himself up, his muscles stiff and aching. His hand instinctively went to his pocket, searching for the key, but it was gone. So was the book. A pang of dread crept into his chest. Was this freedom, or was it another trap? As he stood, the golden light around him flickered, and faint whispers began to return. This time, they weren't harsh or invasive. They were soft, almost melodic, like a distant lullaby. Ryan, he turned sharply, scanning the empty field. "Who's there?" The whispers grew louder, forming words that sent a chill down his spine. "You did this. You set us free." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The voices weren't coming from a single source. They were all around him, as if the field itself was alive. "Where are you?" he called out, his voice trembling. A shadow appeared in the distance, slowly taking shape as it moved closer. At first, Ryan thought it was another watcher, and his body tensed, ready to run. But as the figure drew nearer, he realized it wasn't a monster. It was a young woman. She was barefoot, her long, flowing dress tattered and stained with dirt. Her hair was dark and wild, framing a face that was both haunting and beautiful. Her eyes, however, were what caught Ryan's attention. They glowed faintly, just like the villagers. "You," Ryan stammered, stepping back. "Are you one of them?" The woman stopped a few feet away, tilting her head. "One of who?" she asked, her voice soft and echoing. "The villagers," Ryan said cautiously. "Or the Watchers." The woman's expression darkened. "I am not like the Watchers," she said. "And the villagers. They were once my family." Ryan's heart sank. What happened to them? To this place? The woman sighed, her glowing eyes flickering with sadness. This village was cursed long ago, trapped in a cycle of silence and despair. The Watchers were not always monsters. They were once protectors, guardians of the sacred knowledge within the book. She looked at Ryan, her gaze piercing. But greed and desperation corrupted them. When the plague came, the villagers begged for salvation, but the price was too high. The Watchers turned against us, binding our souls to the land and feeding off our fear and pain. Ryan swallowed hard. And the book? What was it? The book held the truth, the woman said. A way to break the curse. But it could only be unlocked by someone from outside the village. Someone brave or foolish enough to face the Watchers. Ryan felt a pang of guilt. I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to survive. The woman gave a faint smile. Sometimes survival is enough. You opened the book and you wielded the key. You've done what no one else could. Ryan's relief was short-lived. If the curse is broken, why am I still here? Why are you still here? The woman's smile faded. The curse is not fully broken. The Watchers are gone, but their influence lingers. The villagers, they are free in spirit, but their bodies remain trapped, frozen in time. Ryan clenched his fists. Then what do I do? How do I finish this? The woman stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You must return to the village. There is one final task. Ryan hesitated. The thought of going back sent a wave of dread through him. What task? The woman reached out, placing a hand on his chest. Her touch was cold, but not unpleasant. You must find the heart of the village, the place where the curse began. There, you will find the true source of the Watcher's power. Ryan took a shaky breath. And what happens when I find it? The woman's expression grew somber. You must destroy it. But be warned, the heart will not go down without a fight. It will test you, tempt you, and try to break you. If you falter, the curse will return, stronger than ever. Ryan nodded, though his hands trembled. I'll do it. I don't have a choice. The woman stepped back, her glowing eyes locking with his. You are braver than you know, Ryan, but be careful. The heart will know your deepest fears. As she spoke, the golden light around them began to fade. The whispers grew fainter, and the field dissolved into shadows. Ryan blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, he was standing at the edge of the village. The silence was deafening. The streets were empty, the houses dark. The air was thick with tension, as if the village itself was holding its breath. Ryan took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The path ahead was narrow and winding, leading deeper into the heart of the village. Each step felt heavier than the last. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder with every passing moment. Turn back. You don't belong here. This is not your fight. Ryan shook his head, forcing himself to keep moving. He couldn't let the voices get to him. As he reached the center of the village, he saw it. A massive, gnarled tree standing in the middle of a barren square. Its roots twisted like veins, spreading out across the cracked earth. The tree pulsed with a dark energy, its bark shimmering with faint, glowing symbols. At its base was a small, circular opening, like a hollow that led into darkness. Ryan knew this was it, the heart of the village. He approached cautiously, the whispers growing louder with each step. Ryan, the voice was different this time. It wasn't cold or distant. It was warm, familiar. Ryan, don't do this. He froze. The voice was his mother's. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. The tree's hollow began to glow, and a figure stepped out. It was her, his mother, just as he remembered her. Ryan, please, she said, tears streaming down her face. Come home. You don't have to do this. Ryan's chest tightened. You're not real. You can't be. His mother stepped closer, her expression pleading. I'm real, Ryan. I've been waiting for you. Please, let's leave this place. Together, Ryan's hands shook. His mind screamed at him to move, to finish the task. But his heart ached at the sight of her. Ryan, she whispered, reaching out to him. Come with me. Tears blurred his vision as he reached out, his hand trembling. Ryan's hand hovered in the air, just inches away from the figure that looked like his mother. Her soft, pleading eyes pierced his soul. For a fleeting moment, everything felt real. The warmth of her voice, the familiarity of her face, the scent of lavender that always lingered around her. It was all perfect. But deep inside, Ryan knew this wasn't her. He pulled his hand back sharply, his chest heaving. You're not my mom, he said, his voice trembling but firm. The figure froze, her expression shifting into something cold and unrecognizable. Ryan, her voice deepened, turning hollow and menacing. You could have had peace. You could have had her back. Ryan stepped away, his heart racing. You're lying. My mother is gone. I'm not falling for this. The figure's form began to twist and distort, her once gentle features melting into something monstrous. Her eyes burned red, and her skin cracked like shattered porcelain. She screamed, a sound so piercing that Ryan's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. The whispers around him turned into a cacophony of mocking laughter. The air grew colder, and the tree's hollow pulsed with a dark, rhythmic energy. Ryan clutched his ears, trying to block out the noise, but it felt like it was inside his head. You are weak, Ryan, the monstrous figure snarled. You don't belong here. Turn back before it's too late. Ryan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his feet. I've come too far to quit now, he said, his voice shaking but determined. The figure let out a guttural growl and lunged at him. Ryan barely had time to react as he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding her sharp, claw-like hands. She moved with unnatural speed, her distorted body twisting in impossible ways. Ryan scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around for something, anything, that could help him. His gaze landed on a jagged rock lying near the base of the tree. Without thinking, he grabbed it and swung as the creature lunged again. The rock connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out an ear-piercing shriek before dissolving into black smoke. Ryan stumbled back, gasping for breath. The whispers quieted, but the oppressive energy of the tree remained. The hollow seemed to glow brighter, as if taunting him to come closer. He wiped the sweat from his brow and steadied himself. "This ends now," he muttered, stepping toward the tree. As he reached the hollow, a cold wind rushed out, carrying faint echoes of laughter and cries. Ryan hesitated, peering into the darkness. The inside of the hollow seemed endless, a swirling void that pulled at his senses. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The air inside the hollow was thick and suffocating, like walking through a dense fog. Ryan could barely see a few feet ahead, but he pressed on, guided by the faint glow of symbols etched into the walls. With each step, the whispers returned, louder and more persistent. "You'll never make it. This is your grave. Turn back before it's too late." Ryan ignored them, focusing on the path ahead. The ground beneath him felt uneven, shifting like sand with every step. The glow of the symbols grew brighter, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. After what felt like hours, he reached a chamber at the center of the hollow. The room was massive, its walls covered in pulsating, glowing veins that seemed alive. In the center stood an altar, and on it rested a black, beating heart. The heart was enormous, almost as big as Ryan's torso. It pulsed with a sickly red light, sending waves of dark energy through the chamber. Ryan could feel its power, a tangible force that pressed down on him like a weight. He took a cautious step forward, and the whispers grew deafening. "Stop! Don't touch it! You will die!" Ryan hesitated, his hands trembling. He could feel the heart's power reaching out to him, wrapping around him like invisible chains. Suddenly, a voice spoke. Not a whisper, but a deep, commanding voice that seemed to come from the heart itself. "Ryan," it said, calm and menacing, "you've done well to make it this far, but you don't have to destroy me." Ryan froze, his eyes fixed on the heart. "What are you talking about?" The voice chuckled. "You've proven your strength, your determination. You could take my power for yourself. Imagine what you could do with it. No one could ever hurt you again. No one could ever leave you." Ryan's mind raced. The idea was tempting, dangerously so. He thought of all the pain he'd endured, the people he'd lost. With this power, he could control his fate. He could rewrite his story. But then he thought of the villagers, trapped in silence and torment. He thought of the Watchers, twisted by greed and desperation. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I've seen what your power does. Corrupts. It destroys. I won't be a part of that." The heart's glow intensified, and the voice turned cold. "Foolish boy. If you will not join me, then you will perish." The ground beneath Ryan shook, and the glowing veins on the walls began to writhe. Shadows emerged from the corners of the chamber, twisting into monstrous forms with glowing red eyes. Ryan braced himself, gripping the jagged rock tightly. The creatures lunged at him, their movements erratic and frenzied. He swung the rock wildly, managing to fend off the first few, but more kept coming. He knew he couldn't fight them all. He needed to end this now. Summoning every ounce of courage, Ryan sprinted toward the altar. The creatures clawed at him, tearing at his clothes and skin, but he didn't stop. As he reached the altar, he raised the rock high and brought it down with all his strength. The moment the rock struck the heart, a blinding light filled the chamber. The creatures let out agonized screams before dissolving into smoke. The walls of the hollow began to crack and crumble, and the whispers turned into wails of despair. Ryan stumbled back as the heart shattered into pieces, releasing a surge of energy that knocked him off his feet. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the chamber began to collapse. Ryan scrambled to his feet, his body aching and battered. He sprinted back the way he came, the walls of the hollow collapsing around him. The ground shifted beneath his feet, threatening to swallow him whole. Just as he reached the entrance, the hollow gave one final, deafening roar before imploding in on itself. Ryan collapsed outside, gasping for air. The village was bathed in a soft, golden light, and the oppressive silence was gone. As he looked around, he saw the villagers emerging from their frozen states, their eyes wide with wonder and confusion. They spoke to one another, their voices filled with relief and joy. The woman from the field appeared before him, her glowing eyes now warm and gentle. "You did it, Ryan," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You broke the curse." Ryan nodded, too exhausted to speak. As the villagers began to rebuild their lives, Ryan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had faced his fears, defied the darkness, and emerged stronger. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of his story. Ryan sat on the edge of the crumbled hollow, his body weak but his mind racing. The soft golden light that now bathed the village felt surreal, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness he had faced just moments ago. The air was lighter, cleaner, but he couldn't shake the unease lingering deep in his chest. As the villagers regained their freedom, their confusion turned to joy. Families embraced one another, their voices breaking the silence that had gripped them for so long. But amidst the celebration, Ryan noticed something unsettling. The village itself seemed too quiet. Even with the voices of the villagers rising in laughter and conversation, there was an absence of natural sounds. No birds, no rustling leaves, no wind. It was as if the land itself was still holding its breath. The woman from the field approached him again. Her once glowing eyes were now a deep green, full of life, yet tinged with sadness. "You freed us, Ryan," she said softly, "but the land will never be the same." Ryan frowned, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the village. This place was tied to the heart's power for centuries. With it gone, the balance is broken. The soil is lifeless, the air still. It will take time, perhaps generations, for the village to heal. Ryan's gaze drifted across the landscape. The buildings stood intact, but the fields were barren, the trees skeletal. It was a hollow victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Then why do I feel like it's not over?" Ryan asked, his voice low. The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering with unease. "Because some echoes never truly fade." As night fell, the villagers lit lanterns and gathered in the square. They invited Ryan to join them, offering food and drink as thanks for his bravery. He accepted a small bowl of soup, the warmth soothing his aching body, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The villagers shared stories of their time trapped in silence, their memories hazy and fragmented. None of them remembered the exact moment the curse took hold or what had caused it. One old man, his voice trembling with emotion, leaned closer to Ryan. "You're not like us," he said. "You came here for a reason, didn't you?" Ryan nodded slowly. "I was looking for answers. About my mother, about myself." The old man's eyes narrowed. And did you find them? Ryan hesitated. He thought of the vision of his mother, the temptation to give in to the heart's power. He thought of the whispers, the watchers, the fear that had gripped him since he first set foot in the village. I think I found part of the truth, he said finally. But there's still so much I don't understand. The old man nodded, his gaze distant. Sometimes, the answers we seek are not the ones we need. As the villagers began to disperse, Ryan decided to take one last walk through the village. The lanterns cast long, flickering shadows across the cobblestone streets, giving the place an eerie beauty. His steps led him to the edge of the forest, where the hollow had once stood. The ground was now a jagged scar, the remains of the cursed tree reduced to ash and rubble. Ryan stared at the spot, his mind replaying the events of the past few days. Just as he turned to leave, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a whisper. Ryan's blood ran cold. He spun around, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. The village was silent again, but this silence was different, heavier, more oppressive. Ryan, the voice was soft, almost gentle, but it sent a chill down his spine. It was the same voice he had heard in the hollow, the voice of the heart. You think it's over, don't you? The voice continued, its tone mocking. You think you've won? Ryan clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. Show yourself, he demanded. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It wasn't monstrous or twisted like the others he had faced. It was a perfect copy of himself. The doppelganger smiled, its expression unervingly calm. You destroyed the heart, it said, but its power doesn't just vanish. It needed a new vessel. Ryan took a step back, his mind racing. No, that's not possible. The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You felt it, didn't you? The pull, the temptation. The heart saw your pain, your anger, your fear. Chose you, Ryan. No, Ryan shouted, his voice echoing through the night. I'm not like you. I won't let it take me. The doppelganger tilted its head, its smile widening. It's already too late. The ground beneath Ryan's feet began to tremble. The air grew thick, the oppressive energy of the hollow returning with a vengeance. The lanterns in the village flickered and went out, plunging the streets into darkness. Ryan's vision blurred as a searing pain shot through his chest. He fell to his knees, clutching his heart. It felt like it was on fire, a dark energy pulsing through his veins. The doppelganger knelt before him, its face inches from his. Embrace it, Ryan, it whispered. You were meant for this. Ryan's mind was a whirlwind of memories and emotions. He saw his mother's face, heard her laughter. He saw the villagers, their lives shattered and rebuilt. He felt the weight of his choices, the fear of what he might become. With a final surge of willpower, Ryan pushed himself to his feet. I won't let you win, he said through gritted teeth. The doppelganger's expression darkened. Then you will suffer. Ryan stumbled back toward the village square, the shadows twisting and writhing around him. The villagers emerged from their homes, their faces filled with fear and confusion. What's happening? One of them cried. Ryan turned to face the doppelganger, his resolve hardening. This ends now, he said, his voice steady. He remembered the symbols he had seen in the hollow, the glowing veins that had led him to the heart. He realized that the power of the heart could be contained, but only at a cost. As the doppelganger advanced, Ryan began tracing the symbols in the air with his hands. The energy in the air shifted, the shadows recoiling. The doppelganger let out a furious scream, its form flickering and distorting. You can't stop me, it roared. Ryan ignored it, focusing on the symbols. The villagers watched in awe as a golden light began to emanate from his hands, pushing back the darkness. The doppelganger lunged at him, but Ryan stood firm. With a final, forceful gesture, he completed the pattern. The golden light exploded outward, engulfing the village. The doppelganger let out a final, agonized scream before dissolving into nothingness. When the light faded, the village was quiet once more. The oppressive energy was gone, replaced by a peaceful stillness. Ryan collapsed to the ground, his strength completely drained. The villagers rushed to his side, their faces filled with gratitude and concern. "You did it," the woman from the field said, her voice trembling with emotion. Ryan nodded weakly, a small smile on his lips. "It's over," he whispered. As the villagers helped him to his feet, Ryan looked around at the village. It wasn't perfect, and it would take time to heal, but it was free. And so was he.